The challenge is getting organizations to think about human behavior as a measure of success. Everybody thinks about revenue. That's easy. Cool. What are the 12 steps that happen before we have revenue?
12-month research distributed 12 times over a year, every month, is like compounding learning.
The world that we live in today is driven by technology. And the technology that drives our businesses is continuous. You don't go to the store and you buy a box of DevOps.
The idea of the OKRs is to give the team that is working on it the power to experiment and work with things, come up with the right solution rather than dictating this is what the solution needs to be.
We've learned that our people are opening up accounts for dead people. Okay, what should we do about that? Nothing.
Jeff Gothelf is a well-known author and speaker with 20 years of tech experience. He's an expert in product management, lean UX, and OKRs. His work has been featured in the Wall Street Journal and Harvard Business Review. Join us for our conversation with Jeff Gothelf.
Well, welcome to the podcast, Jeff. It's great to have you on. I've been following your work for quite a while now. I was first introduced to it from Lean UX. And so why don't you give us a bit of an introduction about yourself and your background for those that may not know a lot about you.
Sure. My name is Jeff Gothelf, and these days I work as an author and a trainer and a coach and a keynote speaker, connecting the dots from leadership to product development teams about how to successfully integrate the customer into everything that we do. And so as Julian mentioned, I wrote a book called Lean UX, and that was a very practical, tactical book for product development teams to help them build a cross-functional practice for getting to know the customer. And since then, Josh Seiden, who co-wrote that book with me, and I have written a couple of other books together, one called Sense and Respond, which was about teaching leaders how to run digital businesses and focus on customers as the source of data. And then most recently, wrote a book on OKRs called Who Does What by How Much? And that's really focused on goal setting and the proper cultural changes and scale approaches that come with building a new goal setting framework that's focused on customers. And my background is in digital design, product management, leadership, and then ultimately entrepreneurship. And in 20 plus years or so, I feel like I've done a lot of different things, and I bring all of those experiences to the trainings and the writings and the speaking that I do these days.
Yeah, I think your work has been an inspiration to many, and obviously you've, I think, led the way in quite a bit of stuff around Agile UX and frameworks and stuff around that. And I know a lot of what you talk about is kind of centered around objectives and key results, or OKRs. And I just wanted to get into a bit more of that, and for the audience that may be listening that's not necessarily familiar with what OKRs are and why they're essential, especially in kind of product development and product management. How would you describe that?
So OKRs are a goal-setting framework for teams. They've been around a long time, over 40 years at this point, but they became popular in the last decade due to a book by John Doerr called Measure What Matters. And in Measure What Matters, John Doerr inspired a world of executives to really rethink how they set goals, because he showed examples of Google using it and Intel using it and Bono using it, right? And Bono's cool, so we all want to be cool, right? The problem is that in Measure What Matters, Doerr doesn't get particularly practical about how to make this work, what's different about it, why it's challenging, and how to really scale this inside an organization in a successful way. And so there was a gap in the market, and the book that we wrote, Who Does What by How Much, defines OKRs as a customer-centered goal-setting framework. It's an approach to doing work that puts the customer at the center of everything that you do. So you've got an objective, which is a qualitative goal that you're trying to create in the world. What's the change in the world that you're trying to make for the customer, right? So when we finish our work, what will be better for the customer, right? Qualitatively, right? It'll be we will have created the simplest way to schedule a doctor's appointment online in all of Europe, right? Something along those lines. You're looking for that kind of grandiose, qualitative benefit to the customer. And then the key results are the metrics that tell you whether or not you've actually achieved that goal. How do you know that you've created the easiest way for people to make a doctor's appointment online in Europe? And the key and this is where this gets interesting, right? Your key results have to be measures of human behavior. They have to be outcomes. So the measure of success, the goal that you're setting for your team, doesn't talk about solutions in any way. It says we're going to create this customer benefit and we're going to change behavior in this way. And that's going to tell us that we've created the benefit. And that's a really interesting and very different way of setting goals. The concept is simple. I just explained it to you. There it is.
Yeah.
Right. But changing an organization away from measuring the production of a thing to measuring the change in human behavior, the humans that they serve, is a fairly significant undertaking and difficult. And that's what our book is about. And that's what OKRs are about.
Yeah, definitely. I know from your work, I think you've mentioned previously as well, because I think some others have asked you about OKRs on backlogs and if they change with priorities, what happens there when things are still stayed on the backlog, etc. But I suppose where I'm coming from a timeline perspective is how do you tie OKRs to a timeline? And I know obviously you've talked about deliverables being very binary, right? We've got like features, it's either done or it's not done, or a task has been done or it hasn't been done. Whereas OKRs are obviously very hard to measure in some respects and could be subjective. So what are your comments on that regarding timelines and how you actually measure that success and what time frame you give that?
So we look at our strategic direction as an organization. What's the time frame for that? And let's make it realistic. Let's not talk about 5 years from now, because that's not realistic. I don't care what industry you're in, right? We have no idea what's going to happen in the next 5 years, and the pace of change is so rapid. So let's assume you've got a strategic direction, which is a bold assumption for a lot of organizations. And let's assume that you've established that and aligned the organization around it for the next 12 months. Okay, so let's set goals around that 12-month strategic direction. Okay, so we're going to set objectives, and usually your objectives are going to be longer lasting than your key results. Usually, not always, right? So maybe you set your objectives for the year. We're going to create, right? We're an online service that connects patients and healthcare practitioners, right? And so our objective, my team's objective, is to make it the easiest for patients to make appointments with doctors online, and our market is Europe. So that's our objective for 2024 into 2025. Okay. Terrific. On a quarterly basis, we are going to set specific key results that we believe we should be focusing on for that quarter. So let's assume this is a brand new service. In the first quarter, our key results are going to focus on creating awareness and activating and acquiring new users, right? So it's creating traffic to the service, getting folks to sign up and to try it at least once. Those are the kinds of behaviors I'd be looking for in Q1. Now, we're going to set some fairly aggressive goals, and we're going to assume that we're going to hit those goals. And so in Q2, we're going to continue our acquisition goals, but we're going to drive towards increasing retention as well, right? And in Q3 and 4, we're going to continue to increase retention and really try to scale up our market share. Right, something along those lines, and those are the assumptions that we are going to make about the goals, the behavior changes that we think we can hit based on a quarterly basis. And I'm using quarters because most organizations do. They're shorter than a year, and usually they're long enough to give you a sense if what you're doing actually is working or not. Now, if a quarter doesn't make sense in your world, change it to a measure of time, a time box that makes sense for you. Just make it shorter than what you're using today. Right? We want to reduce our cycle time. And then at the end of each one of those quarters, we're going to pause and reflect. What happened in the last quarter? We had awareness, acquisition and activation targets, right? Whatever they were. Like, we want to increase site visits by 50%. We want to convert at least 20% of those site visits into new accounts. And of those 20%, we want at least 5% of those folks to create a doctor's appointment within the first quarter, right? How did we do? Right? How are we trending towards those? Did we knock those out of the park? Terrific, right? Let's think about what we need to do next. Were the goals too low? Should we set them higher? Maybe, maybe not. Did we fail to hit those goals, get anywhere near those goals? Okay, why? What have we learned along the way? Do our goals still make sense in Q2, or do we need to change our goals and planned activities for Q2? Right. So what we're doing is we've got a planning window of about 3 to 6 months that's living and moving forward in time, and we're making decisions based on the evidence that we're collecting along the way. And so by planning in shorter cycles, we are then allowing ourselves the extra agility to change course based on what we're learning along the way, the evidence that we're collecting towards our goals. And to be super clear about this, the commitments that we are making on a quarterly basis are to outcomes, to key results that are measures of human behavior change, not to specific features. Because if a specific feature does not move the needle in the right direction, then that specific feature was wrong. And that's okay.
Yeah, I think that's an awesome overview of it. And one of the key things is that I've picked up, and you know a lot more about OKRs than I do, and I'm still learning a lot about it. But around it's got to be tied to that human behavior. It's got to have a behavioral change, and which, as you've just said, then is obviously moves the needle. I'd like to get your thoughts on how you implement these OKRs and then coming to overcome some of the challenges that you see doing this with teams, because it is a big shift from our own experience around feature based, especially when you're working with clients, when you're not necessarily, you may be working somewhat as we are as a service provider versus working directly on a product team, but where people are so driven by either the hours or the features or the deployments, rather than taking the time to look what impact did we actually have on the organization and that change over time. And what are those challenges that you see, especially with the executives or teams actually adopting this, saying, well, no, we need that accountability?
It's surprisingly difficult to move executives and organizations away from managing to output in 2024. And I say that because maybe 25 years ago, it was perhaps more understandable. But the world that we live in today is driven by technology. And the technology that drives our businesses is continuous, right? Like you don't go to the store and you buy a box of DevOps, right? Or right, it sounds ridiculous.
Yeah.
Right?
Absolutely,
it's a ridiculous statement, right? Like we don't buy technology that way, right? You don't go to the store and get a shrink wrap box of Netflix. Like it doesn't make sense. It used to be that way, right? But it's not that way anymore. And so what does that mean? That means that the ability for us to update and improve the systems that drive our business, and therefore our business, our services, our products, whatever it is continuous. And honestly, it's only up to us to determine how quickly we want to do that, right? So the extreme end of things, you've got like the digitally native behemoths, the Googles, the Netflixes, the Amazons of the world, right? Amazon deploys code to production, right? They're updating the system once every second, right? That's the extreme end of things. Now, you don't have to have that level of technology. You really have to have the culture that can take advantage of that, right? But the point is that the making of a thing, and particularly a digital thing, is a non-event, or at the very least should be a non-event. And when you're building a continuous system, you can optimize it forever. And so the question then becomes, when are we done? Right? When do we stop working on this feature and start working on that feature? And the only way to answer that is through customer behavior, right? So let's say you're trying to drive, just talk about just general e-commerce, right? And you're seeing a lot of drop off in your purchase funnel, and your goal is really to like reduce the drop off. You want, or any way you want to look at it, right? Increase checkout process completion rates, by 90% or up, to 90%, right? Because right now we're about 75%. We want to go from 75 to 90%, right? if you didn't have that goal, you could just sit there and spin and continue to try to make things better. And you'll get to 90 and 90.2 and 90.8 and maybe 91, right? But at some point, that the ROI of spending more time on this particular problem doesn't make sense anymore, right? But your team is making stuff. And as long as you're incentivizing them to make stuff, they're going to keep making stuff. And there's a catch here, right? Especially with digital stuff, is you have to live with that digital stuff forever, right? You sunset it. And I don't know a whole lot of companies who are sunsetting features. I'll be honest with you. So all of this is to say, it's a really long-winded answer, right? It's a really long-winded answer to just basically say that the challenge is getting organizations to think about human behavior as a measure of success. Everybody thinks about revenue. That's easy. Cool. What are the 12 steps that happen before we have revenue? Right? Think about those steps. And of those 12 steps, what is, where are the problems today? And what is strategically important for us, so that we can focus on where to fix the problems right now? And to me, because look, the entire organization is then set up around production, the making of stuff. We set job descriptions that talk about that's your goal. We set goals that way, incentives, rewards, celebrations, promotions, career tracks, right? All of those things are built around this. And it's very, very difficult to extract an organization from that. So that's a big deal. And I'm not trivializing that at all, but that's the biggest issue here.
Yeah, no, I totally agree with your point. And especially when we're working with organizations, or especially large, big B2B, typical B2B enterprises, that kind of thing, that are either, they might be kind of more blue collar stuff, but they're getting forced to go pretty much digital first. And that's where everything's going, right? Either whether it's through their customer experience, their ordering process, whether they're building a proprietary tech, which they're not digital native companies, right? Which is what you mentioned. And these are the people that they think, okay, we're going to do this software development project and it's going to go for 6 months and we're done. And it's like, well, if you're trying to build a platform for the next 10, 15 years of the company, then where does it end? If that makes sense. Like, there's no 6 months. There's no, we launch and great, that's done now and we're finished. Otherwise you can do that. You're just going to have a failing product.
But look, let's do this, because I want to make sure that this isn't, the takeaway here is that this is for tech companies. Let's take the technology out of it completely, right? Let's imagine for just a second that you run a farm equipment store. Okay? You're not Amazon, you're not Google, you're not Netflix, right? You sell tractors and farm machinery and whatever else. That's the extent of my knowledge of farm
I love it.
stores. Okay? But let's assume that that's your business. Okay, terrific. Your system, when I talk about a system, your system is your store, right? Your KPIs are going to be things like sales, revenue, profit, customer satisfaction, same as any business, right? What drives all of those things? Well, what drives those things? Traffic to your store, people coming to the store, people spending time in your store, people taking a look at your inventory, asking questions, trying things out, right? Eventually making a purchase, things like that, right? What are the things that you could do to your store, to your business, to drive those behaviors, right? Those behaviors are your key results. They're your outcomes. They're your measures of success, right? Anything that you do to your store is a feature of your store. Like, let's say you have a big glass window and you're going to put your sales up in the window. That's a feature of your store. Maybe you're going to put one of those big inflatable dudes out there that flails in the wind, right? Look, I'm just saying, it's an idea. And if that drives traffic to the store, terrific. But if it doesn't, then you know what? It didn't work. Maybe you're gonna hire some local hipster coffee shop to make amazing coffee in your store, so that people come in and they get a great coffee while they're in there. If that gets people into the store to spend time and ask questions about farm equipment, that's amazing, right? If it doesn't, it didn't work, right? The point is, this is not about technology. It's about human behavior.
Yeah. No, I love it. And I totally agree with it. And I think one of the key things here is that, and correct me where I'm wrong, but the idea of the OKRs is to to give the team that he's working on it the power to experiment and work with things and use their knowledge to actually come up with the right solution rather than dictating this is what the solution needs to be. Right. So
Exactly.
especially from an executive or a leadership position or whatever it is, we may see a problem and may know the strategic direction, but we may need some advice or help or pointing in the right direction, or just listening to someone else to say, well, okay, we get the objective, we know what we're getting measuring. Now we'll work out how we need to do it, and we'll experiment, and we'll eventually figure that out.
That's exactly right. What you're doing, you spelled that out exactly right. So I'm just going to reiterate what you said to emphasize it. We are empowering the people that work for us to use the creativity, their knowledge, the innovation, the stuff that we hopefully hired them to do and to use to make a better product or service for the people that we serve by setting goals this way.
Yeah. Awesome. It's a brilliant conversation. I want to get a bit more into Lean UX, because that was my introduction to your work, and how I came across it. And I'd love for you to distill for the audience kind of the key principles around Lean UX and where that came from a bit more, and what it's all about.
Lean UX was born out of a problem that I was solving for myself. I was a design manager at a job board in New York City, and that organization was moving towards Agile software development. And I was building a design team, and we couldn't figure out how to fit into that process and into that world. And if you read all the Agile documentation at that point, this was in the late 2000s, there was no mention of design or research or content or any of that stuff. It was just about software development. And so we set out to solve it. I was lucky enough to have a boss who let me experiment with ways of working and processes. And I had an amazing community of folks in the United States, primarily, some in London, in New York City, in San Francisco, who were also struggling with very similar challenges. And we were sharing ideas. And we'd worked together, and I was experimenting with my team. And as we were trying stuff, I was writing about it. I was blogging about it.
Yep.
And then that led, there was no answer to this question, by the way, back then. And so that led to a lot of interest from events and conferences and that type of thing. And I began giving speeches about it. And then eventually I got a book deal to write the process down that we had figured out. And we ended up calling it Lean UX. The nature of the kind of the fundamental aspect of it is deceiving, because it's called Lean UX. So you think, well, it's for user experience designers only. It started out that way, no doubt about it. And I think that's where the name came from. But really where it's ended up is it's a process for cross-functional collaboration between product managers, designers, and engineers to build a shared understanding of the problem that they're solving and the customer that they're serving and what potential solutions might look like very, very quickly, so that we're not wasting time building things that people don't want. We're not sending product managers and engineers down paths to define and develop things that aren't going to work. Instead, we're working together to run lightweight experiments, to build evidence for our choices, and then to design solutions that actually meet customer needs. That's what Lean UX ultimately is these days.
Yeah. And it's a massive thing we see with projects, and that as well as, again, coming back to teams just not doing the research or following enough of a process where people are so focused. Again, it's coming back to delivering features or even what they think the right thing to do is, if that makes sense, without any justification or anything like that there. But essentially they're just running ahead, building features, building things. They deliver it and it's like, that didn't work. What do we do now? So it's like throwing paint at the wall kind of thing, and hoping it sticks and hoping it works. Like we want to. So much wasted resource, I suppose, is the way that what I'm trying to put across there, and I really love the idea of it. How do you? What's your advice for teams that are struggling with it at the moment and are struggling with trying to, I suppose, adopt Agile still from an engineering perspective, and they've got designs and a product manager and designers working on it as well, and are really struggling to get that I would say, ruthless, efficient collaboration is probably the way to describe it.
I think the answer is to start small. This is a big change, and it's a big organizational change. It's not as simple as saying, we'll work in 2-week cycles, right? I mean, it's part of it, but it's not enough, right? So let's talk about the various components. And then of those components, which one do you want to try first? What's an easy one for us to implement, right? An easy one could be, look, we've got new initiatives coming up every month or so, maybe every couple of months. Let's start every initiative not only with a set of requirements, but also with some success criteria that is beyond works as designed or production, right? So we're going to build it. Okay, no question. We're going to build it. And then what will people be doing differently once we build it? Let's add that to every project. And then as we start to build stuff, let's just make sure that we're monitoring those metrics. And if they're not living up to our expectations, let's find out why, right? So what you're doing is you're sort of Trojan horsing these ideas in without the baggage of a label, Agile or Lean UX or design thinking or Lean Startup or Scrum or whatever. And what you're saying is, look, let's just add metrics to this that we're not even accountable for. But let's keep an eye on it, right? And as we start to build stuff, if people aren't doing with what we expect with the thing that we're making, let's find out why, right? Just start with that. That's a great place to start, right? Because if you're doing that, inevitably somebody's going to raise their hand and be like, well, we said that we were going to acquire 15 new customers in the last quarter. We acquired 1. What happened? Well, we talked to our lost prospects, and here's what we heard. Now, right now, you have put the organization in an interesting position, because I guarantee you the organization's got a plan for the next couple of quarters, if not years, but you've got new evidence. And so the question is, will the organization bury its head in the sand, right? And just say, oh well, didn't work, learn some stuff, whatever, keep doing the thing. Or based on what we now know with our lost prospects, here's the change we need to make for the following quarters. It becomes an interesting conversation.
Yeah. No, I definitely agree. And the difference of having one team that is working in that manner is the difference in efficiency, and then not only about how quick they get things done, but it's the actual impact of what that team is doing over against delivering a lot of stuff that's useless. Leads me kind of into my next point around kind of user research and the role of user research in product development, and what your take is on doing deep user research and making sure that whatever we are creating is actually what the customer or users want as well.
Look, I think research is part of the work. I think this is the thing that a lot of folks don't recognize. Not researchers. They recognize it. What I think people don't recognize is the fact that research is part of doing the work. There's tremendous risk in just building something, right? You're gonna just work on it for a week or a month or 6 months or a year or multiple years, and then you're just gonna launch it. That feels like, look, there was a time where that was the right thing to, not the right thing, that was the way things were, because you didn't have a lot of choice. It was difficult to get a hold of people, to get feedback, to talk to them, to learn from them. It is so simple today to get in front of your target audience for 5, 10, 15, 20 minutes, 30 minutes, and ask some questions and show some prototypes or some screenshots, or, 3D print something and put it in front of them and see what they say. All of that stuff is so simple and easy today. And all of that stuff makes your project more likely to succeed if you take what you learn to heart. And so it's this impression that, well, we don't do research, or if we do research, we outsource it, and it's just this big chunk of work over here, and that's it. We do it once and then we're done, right? Continuous research and continuous learning is the key to continuous success these days. And you can have specialists doing it, but you can also train the staff that you already have to do lightweight research, like what we talk about in Lean UX, right? Like what we talk about briefly in Who Does What by How Much, right? To run these lightweight experiments to build some kind of insight into the work that they're doing.
Yeah, definitely. And I totally agree with you. It's something that we see with our projects and with clients, and that we're talking with as well. But a lot of the time, it still surprised me. I don't know why, but today to see teams and that think, oh, we already know what we need to build. Here's, we've got a brief, and here's basically, we want you to just, as a provider that what in the position we're in, or we want you to just quote this, and it's like, well, have you done any research? Is this your executive team's thing? Is this? And they're like, yeah, well, we already know what we need. We know exactly what we need. We're not interested in talking to you. Can we cut the whole discovery thing out? Can we do this? And it's like, well, sorry, but we're not interested, because what's going to end up happening is we're going to build a product that ultimately ends up failing, and it will be our fault. And there's a reason this research is so important. And I think personally that no matter the team that's working on it, especially if you build out a team of engineers and designers and whatever else, even if you've got dedicated resource, but everyone to some degree should have an understanding of the research and should know why we're doing something, what impact it's going to have. And I think that very much comes back to empowering that team through those OKRs, right?
Yeah.
They know what we're trying to do. They know the behavior that we're trying to impact and the behavior we're trying to change, why it's going to move the needle if we get it right. And those requirements or features ultimately link back to that. If they're not impacting that positively, then why are we doing it?
Exactly. That's exactly right. And it's this idea of we know what to make. I get that, right? And I believe that. I believe it in some situations, right? But why not spend a little bit of extra time? Not a lot, right? Just a little bit to validate your assumptions. And the answer is because I might be wrong. That's the answer, right? And no one
Yeah.
wants to be wrong.
Yeah, definitely. And this is the point where, and I've often heard as well, like throughout projects, it's like, oh yeah, but it's going to, take us that little bit extra time, or we're going to have to invest, X amount more or whatever it is. And it's like, yeah, but if we get it right, you're going to get that returned tenfold. If you get it wrong, it's going to flop. Right.
Yeah.
So why don't, like, it's a win-win. You may spend more, but you basically are guaranteeing a successful outcome outside of market factors and other things. But you're doing everything within your power to make sure that whatever you're doing is a success. And so, what are some of the challenges that you see, I suppose, from your perspective with that user research, either from the team side of things, whether it's teams not wanting to be involved in that, or not wanting to understand that, or even from an executive or a leadership position where they're pushing back on that, or what are some things you see with that research side of things?
There's a perception that research is time consuming, lengthy, and will delay the work. And look, there are types of research that are time consuming and lengthy. That's the nature of research, and that's perfectly okay, right? There are also ways to distribute the work. So the phrase I love, I learned it from Janice Fraser years ago, is to do less more often, right? So that's a nice kind of pithy sales pitch to executives about research. We're going to do less research. We're just going to do it more often, right? So instead of doing one big study once a year, we are going to do 12 small studies every month, right? Same amount of
I
effort,
like that.
same amount of money, same amount of time. We're just going to distribute that work over 12 months instead, right? That begins to break down the aversion to the scope, the time, the length, etc. I'd like to believe that with the success of books like Lean Startup and with the success of ideas like design thinking in the world, and that enough executives have been exposed to these ideas, that lightweight, cheap, fast experimentation and learning is something they're at least aware of. Maybe they've never done it, maybe they've never seen it done, but at the very least, they've heard of it. Right. And I think if someone can get in there and demonstrate that to them or coach their team in those techniques, they can learn very, very quickly how to build those research muscles in ways that fit in with what they're already doing. Will that take up some bandwidth? 100%, right? That's the nature of work, right? You can only fit so much work into a time box, right? But it's not going to overwhelm the production of stuff for the team. It's just going to steer them in a better direction. So what they are creating is more likely to succeed.
Yeah, definitely. And I think it comes back to what we were discussing earlier about this continuous improvement of the product, and kind of, if you're going down this line, then when's the end goal? There is no end goal, right? It's just we continually improve, we're continually updating our OKRs, etc. But what I like to think of what you've just described is that kind of that 12-month research distributed 12 times over a year, every month, is like compounding learning. If you're doing that 12 times, you're learning from your learning every single time, right? And you're actually improving it's like interest, but like it compounds. By the end of that 12 months, you'll know so much more than you would have had you just done one big blob of research that by the end of it, everyone forgot what was going on and, it wasn't implemented and that kind of thing. Whereas you can then take those insights, that research and everything and build it into everything that we've been talking about and continually improve the product, continually bring that feedback in, continually update the OKRs. If there has been a shift in objectives, then, we can make that on a month-to-month basis. Not that we should be changing those every month, but the point of it is if there is a shift, something does change, we've got a regular touch point. We're not just, I suppose, going along with the blinkers on, right?
Yeah. And look, and research expires, right? Like the validity of it expires. So imagine you learned when did OpenAI really kind of blow the doors off everybody, right?
2020 ended, and if they got to around 2020 was when they first launched, and then 2021 was where they scaled up very quickly. But then where it became real mainstream was with like kind of ChatGPT 4, which was, I think off memory about 12 months ago, something like that.
Yeah. So let's assume that you did research 12 months ago, prior to ChatGPT really kind of taking hold, right? And all of a sudden, right? And you learned a lot of stuff, right? How much of that is still valid?
Yeah.
Right. And if you broke that down into monthly cycles, then the expense is less, the decay is less, the waste, that's not waste, but the stuff that expires is less. So you've kind of lost less. All this makes sense. It's all these ideas come from lean, right? From lean manufacturing, actually, right? But applied in different contexts.
Yeah, definitely. Leads me into another question now of like, we've touched off on a little bit as well, but like, how do you prioritize with product teams, with teams, especially with really creative and innovative teams? And I know this for ourselves, like we can come up with like 1,000 ideas, even 1,000 different things that we want to do and that kind of thing. How do you prioritize that, and how do you use the OKRs, and how do you approach that where, we lean, coming back to that, we're not trying to do all of these different things, but we're drilling down into, again, stuff that moves the needle. But you've had a lot of experience in this, and I'd love to hear your insights on that.
So again, I think it comes down to a couple things that I mentioned before, but it's worth mentioning again. First of all, you need a strategy, right? And maybe that sounds obvious, but I have to tell you, they don't really exist. And if they do exist, they're usually not well written, or they're very generic, right? It's like, enhance our customers' capabilities to win in the market. like literally, it's stuff like that. And you're like, that's what we like to call word salad. Like, it doesn't really mean anything, right? But it starts with a good strategy, because a good strategy, clear, specific, allows you to say no to things. It helps you with prioritization, right? So, hey, our strategic direction this year is to really enable medical practitioners and first-time patients connect in continental Europe. Whatever. I'm making stuff up on the fly, right? Okay, great. Can we add what do you guys think about adding a weather widget to the app? Okay, help me understand how that's going to help patients and doctors connect in continental Europe, right? So that's the first thing. A clear strategy helps you say no to things, or at the very least, not now to those things. That's number one. Number two is setting goals, right? Setting clear goals that are based on customer behavior. If we have a sense, look, what we're really trying to do is get folks from, downloading the app to making an appointment with a doctor within the first week, right? If they're downloading the app, there's a need, right? So if they're not making an appointment within the first week, we've lost them. Okay. That's our goal. Terrific. Good. Now, what are the ideas that we have that will help us achieve that? Everybody lists their ideas, right? And then as an organization, we are going to make some guesses at that point about what we believe based on our experience and our expertise and the data that we have is most likely to succeed. And then we are going to build those experiments that I've been talking about around those early ideas. And if we get positive feedback that that is going to start to move the needle in the right direction, we are going to double down and expand and grow those ideas. And if we get feedback that says these ideas aren't going to work, we're going to pivot or kill those ideas and go back to our list and try something new. That's the key here. So there's alignment with strategy, alignment with goals, clear measures of customer behavior, good brainstorming and creativity, and then a little bit of guessing, right? And it's educated guessing, to be clear, right? But it's a little bit of guessing and admitting that that's what it is.
Yeah, no, it makes total sense. I'd love to get your thoughts as well. And I know you've talked about this as in some of your stuff I've seen around, a lot of the even bonuses and incentives and things for current job roles or jobs and teams and all that are set up around deployments or features or very binary outcomes. But what is your practical advice on setting up incentives and that kind of rewards program and stuff for OKRs? And what's your opinion on that? So you're smiling there. So what's your comments on that?
That's a tough one. It's a tough one for me because I'm not a specialist in that world. Here's what I know shouldn't be done. Okay. You should not connect your OKR goals and incentives, because what happens is people will game the system. We saw this in 2016 with Wells Fargo in the United States. The key results were number of accounts open per customer or something like that. And there was clear incentive around achieving specific goals. And what did they do? They opened up accounts for people who didn't ask for them. They opened up accounts for dead people, for pets, for animals, you name it, right? People will game the system. So we need to disconnect incentives and OKRs, which makes your question actually even more difficult, right? So then what do we reward, and how do we reward it, and how do we measure it? Look, the kinds of behaviors we need to look for are customer centricity, empathy, collaboration, knowledge sharing, humility, a willingness to change course, a willingness to learn, a willingness to be wrong. How you measure and incentivize that, I don't know. It's tough.
That's interesting. Interesting. I'm glad I'm not the only one that struggles with that concept and working through those things. And I think it is probably definitely, there's obviously different team structures, different team dynamics. There's all different things. And there's no, absolutely, as you say, there's no one right answer on that front. And it's very interesting, the example you gave. And I do remember that. I remember coming across it in a few different examples as to how not to do it. And I think a big part of that is, was that the right OKR or like objective and key results? Did they really make the right thing, where instead of it being just opening accounts, should have it been something a bit different? I don't know what you would say on that there, as to whether or not that mistake could have been made without just narrowing on that specific example, but could that contribute to, could have been a little bit their own fault?
100%. I mean, 100%. Like you can set the wrong goal, and that's okay. And I think if you follow that quarterly timeline that we talked about earlier, you can recognize that before it's too late, or before it's done too much damage. Hey, what have we learned in the last quarter? We've learned that our people are opening up accounts for dead people. Okay. What should we do about that? Nothing, right? No, we need to do something about that, right? So, like, again, you're reducing risk by working in shorter cycles.
Yeah, no, I definitely agree with that, and everything that you've said on that front makes sense. Where do you think leaders, or probably not necessarily even, I wouldn't say at the executive level, but someone that's listening to this that may be a designer or even an engineer or that kind of thing, how can they let's say their team isn't thinking like this here. How would you provide some advice for them to get involved in this and start taking on some of these strategies and maybe introducing it even to their team or their manager, their leader, and start probably taking some ownership of it and bring it into their team to help improve it?
The easiest way to do this, as I mentioned before, is to start small. And I think in this particular case, the way that you start small is by trying to get, like, if you're truly motivated as a manager or a leader to try this, start with one team, a pilot team, right? So don't, let's say you have 500 employees, start with 5 employees and time box them, give them a quarter, and give them an initiative that is sufficiently strategic so that people pay attention to it, but not so strategic that people are really worried about it and start micromanaging it. And then help them set their OKRs, and then let them go. And let them figure out how to do this inside your organization. One of the most important things for that pilot team is to be proactively transparent. So they need to be constantly broadcasting out, here's what we're doing, and here's what we're learning, and here's where this is hard, and here's where this is easy, and here's where we're banging our heads and we can't figure out how to get through something, right? And the idea here is that when they reach the end of that time box, and they've learned how to do this, hopefully, and they've proven value in the idea, they've proven the model, you can now use that evidence to ask for scale, or to scale this to 2 teams or 3 teams, and then 5, and then 10, and then so forth. And the benefit of the transparency is that people saw how they got there. So it's not like they disappeared for 3 months and then reappeared and were like, we're awesome now, and you should totally trust us, and everybody should work this way, right? People saw the process. They saw the pain, they saw the growth, they saw the learning, the improvements, etc., and they kind of were on board for the ride, so that when it's their turn to join it, they're believers in the process.
Yeah, I think you've touched off on one of my next questions there, which was I was going to follow up with, was around what should the reporting be like? We've talked a little bit about accountability. It's not necessarily binary outcomes where, if you got this and that and we're tracking hours or features, etc. But it's obviously super important that communication, right? As in whatever, if you've given, just say very simply as like a team leader or has kind of set these OKRs with their team and let their team go away and do this, what should the reporting, what should the communication look like? Obviously this depends on the organization, but I'm assuming a communication is super important here.
Yes. I'll steer away from any kind of specific channels. So whatever channels your organization is already using, use those, right? Don't try to kind of force people to use a new tool or a new communication channel. In my opinion, the pilot team itself should report back on a weekly basis to its stakeholders and perhaps the entire organization, right? But at the very least, the stakeholders. Here's what we did this week. Here's what we learned. Here's where we got stuck. Here's what we're doing next week. Here's where we need help, right? Like those 5 things. Super easy, 5 bullet points every week to the stakeholder team. That's one of the simplest things that you can do. Demo days from that pilot team every other week, regardless of whether or not they've built anything or done anything, right? They're going to stand up every other Friday at lunch. They're going to buy everybody pizza, so they show up. Everybody shows up for free pizza. And they're going to talk about what they've learned in the last couple of weeks. Hey, we ran this experiment and we learned this and we killed this idea, but then we built this idea. And here's how the metrics are going for that. And and we've learned that when we use this tool or this deliverable, it makes communication better for us. So we're going to continue to use that, and then take questions, right? I think it's stuff like that. And then at the very end, I think they should, at the very end of that time box, I think they should do a big presentation that really talks about sort of the journey and what they learned and where they started and what happened along the way and where they finished. But along the way, they're constantly telling that story.
Yeah, no, I really, really agree with that. And appreciate the insight. I think it's very, very helpful. The final one I just wanted to touch off on just a little bit was around kind of risk management as throughout this process. We have touched off on a little bit as well, but like the risks that are there that where we don't set these OKRs or we don't do the user research and we go and build whatever we think is the right thing to build, etc. Obviously, there's some significant risks that play there, and either product not working, budget blowouts, all of this kind of thing. And there's certain instances where, not always, but you've kind of got one shot to get some things right. And if it's not right from there, you can always improve and iterate. But I'd love to get your point on just mitigating risks and the role that kind of the research part of the product management comes into play there as trying to alleviate those risks and make sure that we're not, again, we're lean, right? That's what we're coming back to.
I mean, look, this is the crux of it. This is all risk mitigation, which isn't a particularly sexy title for a book, right? But that's what this is all about. This is about reducing the risk of building the wrong thing for the wrong person in the wrong way, right? And so how are we going to do that, right? This is, we're set up to believe that as we gain more experience and more expertise, we should become leaders and managers, and those leaders and managers are infallible. They're not, right? They're humans and they make mistakes. And the most powerful thing I think a leader can do to encourage this way of working that we've been talking about is to model the behavior they want to see in their teams, right? So model the humility. And I want to be super clear about that. Humility isn't the abdication of leadership. It's not the abdication of vision. Humility is simply the ability to change your mind in the face of evidence that contradicts your opinion, and to do so publicly. And there is nothing more powerful for an organization, nothing more motivational for an organization than to have an executive stand up and say, 6 months ago, I told you that we were headed in this direction, and I was fairly confident that's where we should go. In those 6 months, I have learned these 5 things. And because of those 5 things, I have realized that I was wrong. Okay. And based on that, we are now changing direction for this. It's massively powerful because it happens so rarely. But when you do that, you inspire your folks, the folks that work for you, to do the same thing, to admit when they're wrong and to adjust course based on new insight. And nothing could be more powerful for an organization than that.
Yeah, no, it's awesome insight. It's been a great discussion, and I really appreciate everything you've gone through and everything that we've discussed. It's been really, really interesting for me, and no doubt the people listening would have gained a lot of information from yourself, from your experience as well. So I really appreciate that. One thing I do with every guest that comes on is I've got a finale kind of segment that I ask 3 questions, and so I'd like to jump into those now. So the first one is, what's one thing you believe businesses are not paying enough attention to right now that will be critical in the next 5 years?
Their customers.
At least that we can predict now.
Their customers. Always.
Yeah. I totally agree. Absolutely. Now, the second one is, what legacy do you want to leave in your industry, and how do you hope your work will influence or shape the future?
I hope that the legacy that my work leaves is a greater tendency to seek insight from outside of the company and to use that insight to make better decisions. In other words, the sort of the embodiment of humility, or the operationalizing of humility.
Very interesting. Very inspiring. And the final one is, if you could go back in time, what advice would you give to your younger self at the start of your career?
To start writing sooner. I started in my 30s. I should have started in my 20s, and I'd be a much better writer today for it.
Well, I think you do very good job. So I think there'd be a lot of people that look up to the work that you've done as well. So I really appreciate it, Jeff, and I appreciate you coming on, taking the time and sharing all your insights with us. Where can people connect with you, and where can they find your stuff?
So super easy. Find me on LinkedIn and connect there, and then jeffgothelf.com. That's where my blog is, and everything you need to know about me is there as well.
Awesome. Well, no doubt we'll keep in touch. And for anyone listening, if you found today's episode insightful, head over to our learning center as well, and Intuji.com. There's a lot more resources there. And you can also check out the YouTube channel and all of our other channels, Pulse by Intuji, for all our other episodes and clips, etc. And if you've got any feedback, don't hesitate to reach out to us. And thanks once again, Jeff. It's been great discussion, and look forward to keeping in touch and having you on again. Thank you.
My pleasure, Julian. Thanks so much for having me on the show. It was great.
Thank you.